Now, some of the most basic animations and also some of the most powerful things that you can do with foundation swatches is the ability to transition your styles between a default state and a hover state. So in this demo, we're actually going to be changing and animating this simple box here, and really giving you a tutorial about how to apply hover transitions to your content. So we're going to start off with just this simple box. And when I hover over it, I want to do various things to this box. So let's get started. So I created these pen stacks to allow us to really adjust our styles as we go along. So here I have a pen for my default state of our box, and I have a pen for our hover state. And what is my box? So here I have a one column stack, and I added a class of my box to this one column. Okay. And then also I have a button, because later we're going to apply some styles to a button. I added the class of my button to this button, and that's it. So before we get started on the hover styles, let's go ahead and look at our defaults. I added a class of my box to a height swatch just to give this a height. Okay, so I made it 50% browser height so that we see here it's just a box that's 50% height. Okay. Then I gave it a background swatch, added a class of my box to the my box class, and I gave it a background color, a gray background color. So there we go. We have a box that is gray, that is 50% height of the browser. Okay. Again, very simple. I can apply the same class to multiple swatches, and I have that class assigned to this one column. So let's say once we hover over, I'm going to go ahead and change that color to be blue. So let's add this over here. So here I have a background color. And what I did here is I set the class to my box, and I set the pseudo state to hover. And I set the background color to be blue. So again, our default background is my box is gray. Pseudo state is set to none, right? These optional conditions, we didn't even touch them. And then on the hover background, I set the hover state to be or the pseudo state to be hover. So let's go ahead and preview that. And we'll notice when I hover, my background, my box turns blue. Very cool. Now, when I turn my box blue, some things happen, right? The text isn't as readable. Yeah, so we need to fix that. Let's go ahead and fix that. So I'm going to go ahead and I had this swatch pre-made. I have a text colors swatch. And I set the class of my box. Pseudo state is hover. And then I chose the colors that I wanted. I made the links green. I made the text white so that when the background color changes to blue, those colors are going to look correct. So now when I hover over, I have white text and my link colors are green as well. Awesome. Now, if you notice here, this, while it changes, it's very abrupt, right? We might want this to be a little more subtle. Okay, so what can we do there? What I'm going to do is there is something called a transition swatch. Okay, now what is a transition swatch? Go ahead and add that into our default state. Transitions tell the browser, whenever any style changes for this element, I want you to animate that property. So for example, I added a transition swatch here, and I applied the class to my box. And essentially the default speed is 1 second. So what that means is the browser is going to take 1 second to animate those styles from the default state into the hover state. Okay, let's have a look at that. So now when I hover over, we'll notice that that background color is no longer abrupt. Okay, it took its time. Okay, so now let's deal with this button. Let's say in this example, I actually want, by default, I don't want to see the button at all. And then when I hover, I want to see the button. Okay, so what we're going to do is, let's go ahead and set the default opacity of the button to 0. And we're going to do that simply by adding an opacity swatch. And we're going to set the class of my button, because remember, that's the class I added to my button. And we're going to set that to be 0. So let's look at that. So our button is invisible now. And so we need to be able to see it on hover. So what you might think you could do is, okay, Joe, I know how to do hover styles. I'm going to go ahead and let's move this to the button hover. And I'm going to set the button opacity for when I hover. We want it to be an opacity of 1. Right? That should work. So here I have opacity set to 0. And then when I hover, it's set to 1. Let's have a look at that. Okay. So when I hover, wait, my button's still invisible. But if you notice, if I hover over the button, it then becomes 1. So how can we make it so when I hover over this entire container, that button comes in? So in order to do that, we need to do something a little bit trickier. Okay. And what we're going to do is we're going to modify that opacity swatch just a little bit. And what we're going to do is we're going to have our class set to my button. And then we're going to target the parent class. So in this case, my button is inside my box. So I'm going to put a parent class of my box. And when you do that inside of a swatch, we have the option to say hover parent. So what this is saying is, it's saying when you hover over the parent for my button, then apply this style. So again, if we look at this, the code here, my box hover, my button, opacity 1. So now, when we hover over my box, our button then becomes visible. It's not reliant on hovering over just the button. We can hover on anywhere over the parent, that button will become visible. Now, you might be thinking, hey, that button comes in immediately. How can we fix that? So you probably already figured it out, but just like the My Box, we're going to create a transition swatch. This transition swatch applies to my button, and we're going to have a speed of 1000. So let's have a look at that. So now when I hover over, the background as well as the button all fade in, and those values are transitioned at the same time. Now, just for fun, I'm going to go a little bit farther here. I thought it'd be interesting to actually delay the button's animation so that we get a very interesting effect. So what I've done here is I've added a special animation just for when we hover. Okay. And what that does is, again, we want to do this when we hover over the parent, just like we did the opacity, because we want this transition to happen when we hover over the parent, not just the button. So we have this similar setup. We have class of my button, parent class my box with hover parent enabled. That allows us to apply a style to my button when we hover over the parent. Now, here we'll see that I set the speed to 1000, which is the default. But what I'm doing here is I'm adding a delay of 750 milliseconds, which is about 3/4 of a second. So now when I hover over my box, the animation of the button will happen 3/4 of a second after the animation starts. So let's have a look. So now when I hover over, the button delays, and we get a very nice delayed, very elegant hover effect for this layout. So I hope you enjoyed this. It's a very powerful concept. Hopefully this is a simple enough demo that were able to follow. Really, you can extend this to an infinite amount of styles and abilities within Foundation 6 swatches. This video and this demo just scratches the surface. You could download this project file on the Foundation's product page, and I hope you enjoy it. Take care. Bye.